Hi, everyone. So as already announced, my research is actually focused on family politics, and more precisely, I'm looking into how local LGBT organizations in Bosnia and Herzegovina, Croatia and Serbia frame family politics, that is family policies. So I'm focused on the issue of legalization of same-sex partnerships, adoption and birth rights, etc. And I'm actually looking that in relation to the dominant traditional patriarchal and pronatalist family policies that are being dominated here in these three countries. So I will just, for the beginning, rush through the current situation regarding same-sex partnerships. Basically, only Croatia out of these three countries has legalized same-sex partnerships in 2014, and that happened a year after this referendum was organized by right-wing anti-gender organizations and informal circles with the support of Catholic Church. And the referendum was about the new definition of marriage as a union between men and women. It was successful. So basically, in spite of what Constitution says in Croatia, it is also possible to legalize same-sex partnerships since 2014. And in 2020, the Constitutional Court finally brought a decision that made equal heterosexual and homosexual couples in terms of adoption and rights and fostering children. As for Serbia, this possibility for legalizing is becoming greater with the adoption of civic code that is expected soon, sometime soon, nobody knows when. But basically the draft was also made by a local lesbian organization from Belgrade. And in Bosnia and Herzegovina, the situation is similar. The draft law was developed by local CSO, and they are now waiting for this working group that is going to be comprised from representatives of relevant institutions and local organizations, and we will see whether legalization is really going to happen. So basically, what is kind of common for all three countries is that all these initiatives came from local LGBT organizations, so they didn't came from any relevant institution or the government or international organization. Most of them, I'm not so sure about Croatia, but for Serbia and Bosnia, yes, they kind of went under the table. So they were not so publicly spoken of. The activists were reluctant to get into public debates over these issues because they are always, so to say, hot issues in these countries. And they are framed through so-called advocacy campaigns. So they are based in policies, in policy meetings, lobbying, advocacy campaigns, etc. So I think that's pretty much a copy-paste of what was happening in the West. So basically what I'm interested in is whether the family politics that are being framed in this way, so to say through policies, not through politics, how they correspond to what we are referring to as so-called traditional family, that is the family which is being shaped through this, I call it anti-gender discourse or anti-gender narrative, which is being proponed by anti-gender movements. Now, I just have to say that apart from Croatia, where we have actually organizations that are speaking loudly and clearly about dangers coming from gender ideology, that is not so situation in Serbia and Bosnia and Herzegovina. Nevertheless, that doesn't mean that those ideas are not being shared by many, and they have they do exist. They are just not framed in terms of gender ideology. Anyways, this family, this traditional family, is actually this civic nuclear family model that erased at the end of 19th, beginning of 20th century. It's based on traditional values. It's based on this naturally understood binary between men and women, and they are in between very complementary, and this natural compatibility is what makes family functional and capable for procreativity, which is its, of course, ultimate goal. So they're very resistant to this idea that gender or sex could be socially constructed or fluid. They are actually very resistant to the idea of gender. But nevertheless, I would like to refer to Esther Kovac, which I found really interesting author on these issues, and her important notion that we should never dismiss these claims as backward, primitive, or fanatical. So basically what anti-gender movements are saying is that modern family is based actually in the Catholic vision of the family, which is also accepted by other religious communities. It's a sacred bond between men and women. It's witnessed by God. It forgoes state and society. But we also have some traditional sociological family theories that can actually scientifically, so to say, support this family ideal. So, for example, if you look into Emil Durkheim, he sees modern family as a form that secures organic solidarity among its members, and it's firmly based in biological, natural, gender-based division of labor between men and women. Talcott Parsons, in the first half of 20th century, also prominent sociologist, never brought into question this idea of gender-based division and of responsibilities between men and women. So biology has been there, so to say, forever. And these ideas are basically just taken over by these modern anti-gender movements that are framing this new/old traditional family model. Now, the only problem with this ideal model of family is that it basically ceased to exist. So it's becoming rare in the modern world, where we know divorced parenthood, single parenthood, families without children, same-sex families, families that are torn with war and migration, such as it is the case in post-Yugoslav countries. So these are all very important factors that actually change this idea of ideal modern family. But in spite of this, for me, the key question is basically, why are so many conservative, right-wing, neoliberal governments, which we tend to call populist, are so reluctant to accept these changes and eager to impose various pronatalist family strategies that enhance the above-mentioned ideal model? So what I argue is that the reason for this is not because these regimes are backwarded or traditional or nationalistic, but I see that as a very carefully calculated economic interest. So basically, I think that this traditional family that is being pushed by anti-gender narratives represent a sufficient substitute for the social welfare state that is completely destroyed due to neoliberalism. Only the strong middle class, white, heterosexual, ethnically and religiously proper family model is capable of sustaining the discourse of the family that these regimes need, which stipulates family responsibility as a value and its independence from the state, and obligations that state has in providing and securing economic and social rights for its citizens. So in post-socialist neoliberal peripheries, like post-Yugoslav countries are, family became the key provider of economic and social security. And this is the reason why these regimes, with support of different anti-gender organizations and circles, are focused on pronatalist measures and not on securing economic and social assistance and safety for families with children, or even for citizens, regardless of their marital status. So having all this in mind, the question arises, so what is kind of an alternative to this traditional modern family? And the first thing that pops up on my mind is TV show Modern Family, which I frankly like to watch. It's funny, but in the same time, it's, I don't know, kind of obnoxious and pretty disgusting sometimes. And if someone would actually suggest me that this is the adequate alternative to the traditional family, I would completely disagree for several reasons. First of all, I think that family whose happiness and openness to the differences depends on extremely high economic and financial status is not what we are looking for. So, for example, if we would imagine this Pritchett family living from significantly lower paid jobs somewhere in the middle of America, I highly doubt that they would be living in such a harmony with all these funny and lovable differences. So I would argue that we have to take more effort in imagining this alternative to traditional family. And another question arises, for me, very important one, and that is what kind of family actually we can see in this progressive narrative. And when I say progressive, I'm referring to different human rights organizations, including women, LGBT, and leftist circles and political parties, whose counter-narrative to anti-gender one is based on protection of human rights of women and LGBT persons, protection of reproductive rights for women, and also legalization of same-sex partnerships. So again, when you say what is alternative to traditional family, somehow it pops up, oh, it's a same-sex family. But I would be very careful with that. And there are many authors coming from Judith Butler or Ulrike Dahl, Lisa Dugan, who claim that there is nothing alternative, nothing subversive in same-sex families. And based on my interviews that I have done with local LGBT activists in these three countries, some of these critics are actually standing in this region. So the first issue is that many of them see marriage as a right. Marriage is not a human right. It's something that is prescribed in European Convention on Human Rights for men and women, but the Charter of Fundamental Rights leaves the final, which actually relates to same-sex partnerships, leaves the final decision on national legislators. So it's not something that is guaranteed human right. What is more important in this regard is that in this way, family rights of LGBT people are depending only on state. The state is the one who decides whether or not family can exist. And in this way, same-sex families are basically ripped of their privacy. The second question is family possible outside the politics? And with this, I have to continue what Caroline also said, and this is this insistence on being apolitical among civil society actors. And that's something that I find very strange and very dangerous, because it leaves me with the question, when did politics become related only to political parties? And if we want to play policies, but not politics, where does that leave us in actually envisioning a different society, different norms, and at the end, different family models? So, as I already said, most of these initiatives are framed through policies, advocacies, lobbying activities, which basically reduces them on not getting involved into any kind of critics toward a wider social context or even the wider politics that relate to family. For example, in Serbia, but also in other countries, LGBT activists do not react publicly when a government announces certain negative, pronatalist, nationalistic statement or regulation or policy. They do not get involved into discussions regarding reproductive rights of women. So basically they are restraining themselves not to kind of, corrupt their path, their initiative, and they're framing this issue as human right, as issue of equality, as step toward EU, without actually tackling any wider social or political context. The third issue is related to the class and the question whether marriage is a class question. So what progressive forces are constantly failing is to relate debates on family and especially reproductive rights to the social and economic rights. In the context of Central European countries and Balkan, this is, I believe, due to the hastily rejection of socialist legacies. None of my interlocutors mentioned or discussed the same-sex partnership in relation to class. Economic and social rights are being mentioned, but only in the context of gaining those rights through the marriage, not as rights that states should be securing to anyone independently of whether you're married or not. Thus, we're missing the key postulate for family life, and that is economic stability, financial security, housing, health protection, social security, etc. So this is the aspect of family life that is flaringly missing from the advocacy campaigns for legalization of same-sex partnership. And I think that situation everywhere, not only in post-Yugoslav states. And finally, there is a question of who actually is entitled to same-sex partnership. When you say same-sex partnership, you basically exclude all those transgender people who do not want or will never go through sex reassignment. So you exclude gender non-binary people. And I would argue even further that the whole anti-gender narrative is pretty much focused on the issue of so-called third gender and on transgender rights. But I don't see progressive forces actually taking that battle. So these issues are rarely on their agenda. And even when they are being mentioned, they are referred as too complicated issues that are simply drawing our attention from something that is much more important, such as social and economic rights. They are involving us into endless politics of identity, etc., etc. Now, at some level, I can understand these critics, and partially I can even agree with them. But I would argue that if we take this game of essentialization of gender identity, and that is the game of anti-gender narratives, then we will be in big, big trouble. And finally, this is something that I would like to discuss with you. Can same-sex partnership be seen as an alternative model to the traditional family? I would argue that as long as it is secured for monogamous couples, men and women, who are economically stable, who are not eager to be involved in critical politics toward establishment or dominant social values, accepting their family as primary and only source of economic and social stability and security, I argue that it is not. Thank you.